The room reeked of death and expensive cologne. Jane stood frozen at the edge of the grand mahogany bed, her manicured fingers gripping the silk sheets as she stared at the lifeless body of her husband, Chief Edward Olatunji. The dim chandelier flickered, casting eerie shadows across his still face. His hands, once adorned with rings of power and wealth, lay limp beside him. His mouth, slightly open, seemed as if he had one last thing to say, but death had stolen his voice. A chime rang from her phone. The lawyer. With a deep breath, Jane composed herself. She had been preparing for this moment for years. The grief she displayed at the hospital, the carefully orchestrated tears, she had played her role flawlessly. Now, it was time to reap the rewards, or so she thought. The next morning, she arrived at the lawyer's office, draped in a black designer dress, her face hidden behind dark sunglasses. She expected a seamless transition. The mansion, the cars, the bank accounts, all legally hers now. But as the lawyer unfolded the will, a sickening chill crept up her spine. I, Chief Edward Olatunji, leave all my assets, properties, and investments to my first wife, Adebisi Olatunji, the only woman who ever truly loved me. Jane's breath hitched. The room spun. No, 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 no. This had to be a mistake. She reached for the paper, her hands trembling. The words didn't change. The reality of it all slammed into her, like a hurricane. The fortune she had schemed for, the luxury she had imagined, it had all slipped through her fingers, like sand in the wind. And then, as if fate wasn't cruel enough, the lawyer cleared his throat. There's one more thing, Mrs. Jane Olatunji. She turned to him, barely able to speak. Chief Edward also left behind a significant amount of debt. And, as his legal wife at the time of his passing, you are responsible for it. The world went dark. Jane's ears rang as if the universe had just shattered around her. She blinked at the lawyer, trying to process his words. Debt? What? What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, flipping through a thick file. Chief Olatunji took out several loans to fund his businesses, secure properties, and cover some personal expenses. Unfortunately, with his passing, these debts have now fallen to you as his surviving spouse. Jane's stomach twisted. That can't be right. He was wealthy. He owned properties, businesses. The lawyer raised a hand, silencing her. All those assets legally belonged to his first wife, Adebisi. Chief Edward was meticulous in ensuring she inherited everything. Meanwhile, the liabilities, he slid a document across the table, belonged to you. Jane's hands shook as she picked up the paper. A long list of figures and creditors stared back at her, the total sum at the bottom nearly making her faint. 800 million naira. Her chest tightened. This has to be a mistake. The lawyer sighed, leaning back. I understand this is a shock, Mrs. Olatunji, but everything is legally binding. Your husband left nothing for you except these debts. If you have any other questions, I suggest you consult your own attorney. Jane felt like the air had been sucked from the room. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. She had married Edward for wealth, comfort, and security, not to be saddled with a financial disaster. She had played her part so well, always the doting, obedient wife. But now, as she sat in the cold, sterile office, the truth loomed over her like a storm cloud. Edward had outplayed her. And the worst part, the first wife, Adebisi, had won. Jane's black heels clicked aggressively against the marble floors of the Olatunji estate as she stormed inside. The servants glanced at her warily, exchanging nervous glances, but she ignored them. She had to fix this, had to fight, had to get what she deserved. Marching up the grand staircase, She burst into Edward's study, his sacred space. For years, he had never allowed her to step inside without his permission. Now, he was dead, and she needed answers. She rummaged through drawers, yanked open cabinets, and flipped through files. Nothing. Then she spotted a locked safe. Her heart pounded. This is it. She knew Edward kept secrets. He had been a cautious man, but surely, he must have left something for her. Some hidden stash of money, an offshore account, something. Frantically, she pulled at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "Madame," a voice called behind her. She spun around to see Musa, the head servant, standing at the door, his face calm yet knowing. "What?" she snapped. "You will not find what you are looking for," he said simply. Jane narrowed her eyes. "What do you mean?" Musa stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Oga Edward was always ahead of you. He knew your heart before you even spoke. That safe does not belong to you, and it never will." Jane clenched her fists. "You think I'm just going to accept this?" Musa smiled, a slow, almost pitying smile. "You already have no choice, madame." With that, he turned and left, leaving Jane standing in the wreckage of her own greed. She had married for money. Now, she was left with nothing. No, not nothing. She was left with debt. And she had no idea how she was going to survive. The weight of the debt pressed against Jane's chest, like an invisible hand strangling her. She spent the next few days locked in the mansion, refusing to eat, refusing to acknowledge the reality of her situation. The once luxurious estate that had felt like a trophy, now seemed like a prison. And then, the letters started arriving. Final notices, court summons, threats, one by one. The creditors Edward had borrowed from came knocking, demanding their money. The first to arrive was a cold-eyed bank representative. "The estate is legally owned by Madame Adebisi," he informed her with the same indifference someone would use to read the weather report. "However, your late husband secured a personal loan with your name attached. The bank will be seizing any assets under your ownership." Jane sat motionless, staring at the man. "Ownership? What ownership?" She had nothing. What do you mean?" she stammered. The man sighed, tapping a document. "Your cars, your jewelry, any properties purchased under your name. We have already repossessed your accounts." Jane's blood turned cold. "My accounts?" "Yes, madame." He stood, tucking the files back into his briefcase. "You have exactly 14 days to vacate the estate. Madame Adebisi has formally requested your removal." At that moment, something inside Jane snapped. Adebisi. That woman had taken everything. Her wealth, her status, her life. No, she wouldn't allow it. The next morning, Jane stormed out of the mansion, dressed in one of her last designer outfits. If she was going to fix this, she needed power. And power came from connections. She went to the one place she knew men like Edward gathered, the exclusive Lagos Country Club. But the moment she stepped inside, all eyes turned. Not in admiration, in amusement. A group of wealthy women, the same ones who had once fawned over her, whispered behind their hands. Their laughter was sharp, mocking. And then she saw him, Chief Bayo, one of Edward's longtime business associates. "Perfect," she approached, plastering on her most charming smile. "Chief Bayo, what a pleasure." Bayo, a rotund man in a crisp white agbada, turned to her slowly. His expression, however, was not warm. "Jane," he said coolly, "I was wondering when you'd show up." Jane batted her lashes. "I wanted to speak with you. Perhaps over dinner. I know Edward always valued your friendship." A slow smirk spread across his face. "Ah, Jane, you think this is a game, don't you?" Jane's smile faltered. Bayo leaned in. "Everyone knows what happened. Edward played you like a fool. You thought you were a queen, but you were nothing more than a pawn. Jen's face burned with humiliation. He raised a hand, cutting her off. You're a liability now, Jen. No man in this cycle will touch you. Not for love, not for business. Then, with a chuckle, he added, but if you're desperate, I know a few men who'd be happy to keep you, for the right price. Jen felt as though she had been slapped. Tears burned at the back of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She turned sharply and walked out, her heels clicking against the marble floor like the ticking of a doomsday clock. By the time she reached home, the estate was no longer her home. Adebisi had arrived. Jen stood at the grand gates, watching as servants carried in fresh flowers, new furniture, everything she had once owned, now replaced. And there, at the entrance, stood Adebisi herself. She was a regal woman, draped in an elegant lace bubu, her gele tied perfectly. Unlike Jen, she didn't need excessive jewelry or designer brands to radiate power. Adebisi met Jen's eyes with quiet triumph. I thought I'd see you before you left, she said smoothly. Jen clenched her fists. You did this. You turned Edward against me. Adebisi let out a soft laugh. Oh, Jen, you never had him to begin with. Jen's chest rose and fell rapidly. Where am I supposed to go? She demanded. Adebisi stepped forward, lowering her voice. That is not my problem. She tilted her head. You wanted wealth without love, didn't you? Now, you have nothing. Perhaps, if you had loved Edward the way I did, things would have been different. Jen shook her head, refusing to accept defeat. You think you're better than me? She spat. Adebisi smiled. No, I know I am. And with that, she turned and walked into the mansion. The doors closed behind her. Jen was left standing outside, with nothing, and no one. Edward had always been a patient man. He had built his empire from the ground up, starting as a struggling businessman with nothing but determination and a loyal wife by his side. Adebisi had been there through it all, when they could barely afford a meal, when he lost his first major investment, when the weight of failure nearly broke him. And then, success came. Wealth, influence, power. But with those blessings came parasites, people who wanted to feast on his success without contributing to it. And none of them embodied that greed more than Jen. At first, Edward had been amused by Jen's charms. She was younger, stunning, and carried herself with the poise of a woman who had mastered the art of seduction. He saw the way she calculated her every move, the way she carefully curated an image of devotion and innocence. But Edward was not a fool. He had spent years navigating the cutthroat world of business. He knew when someone was playing a game. And Jen's game, it was textbook. Edward's first suspicion arose when he overheard a hushed conversation between Jen and her friend at a private lounge. She's gone, finally, Jen whispered, swirling a glass of champagne. Her friend, a woman just as materialistic as she was, smirked. Yes, Adebisi has relocated to the US. She's no longer in the picture. Jen smiled. Perfect. That means it's time to move to the next phase. Edward, sitting in a secluded booth nearby, sipped his whiskey and listened. The next phase, it wasn't hard to piece it together. Jen had played this game before. She had married a wealthy man before him, a prominent businessman named Alhaji Musa. She had flattered, seduced, and manipulated him until she had drained him of enough wealth to sustain herself. Then, with expert precision, she filed for divorce, taking a sizable settlement before moving on to her next target. Edward, he had been her next meal ticket. But Jen didn't know that Edward had already uncovered her past. He had hired a private investigator months before, long before he had even proposed. The reports had been damning. Jen's first husband had been left in financial ruin after their divorce. She had multiple secret bank accounts, funneling money out of Edward's businesses. She was seeing other men, young, flashy ones who had nothing but their looks and charm. The confirmation came when Edward received an anonymous video. A grainy but clear recording of Jen, in a hotel suite, wrapped in silk sheets, with a man half Edward's age. The betrayal stung, but not as much as the insult to his intelligence. Jen truly believed she could outwit him. That night, as she lay beside him in bed, Edward gazed at the ceiling, listening to her slow, steady breathing. She had no idea that her time was running out. By morning, he had made a decision. He called his lawyer. "I want my will revised," he said. And just like that, Jen's fate was sealed. The day Jen realized she had lost everything, Edward's last words to her echoed in her mind. "You think wealth is built on beauty, Jen?" he had once told her, shaking his head with disappointment. "You think a pretty face can sustain a kingdom? Adebisi was my partner. She sacrificed. She built with me. You only came to harvest." Jen had laughed then, dismissing his words. But now, as she stood outside the gates of the estate she once ruled, with nothing to her name, she finally understood. She had spent her life chasing fortune, using men as stepping stones. But this time, she had gambled too hard, and lost everything. To encourage this channel, please subscribe, like, and leave a comment below. Thank you for watching and see you in my next video.